behalf of TechPACT, I welcome you to this webinar, which is part of the TechPACT Equity for All research series. TechPACT is an organization that envisions a world where anyone with a passion for technology has the opportunity to succeed. Founded by a group of impassioned technology leaders, we are committed to raising diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging across the technology community. Hi, my name is Edward Wilson Smythe. My pronouns are they and them, and I'm the head of research at TechPACT. This webinar is based on an upcoming TechPACT white paper entitled Impact Beyond the Diversity Headlines, which identifies 4 key drivers of inequity in technology workplaces and in the industry as a whole: biased recruiting, unfair opportunities and recognition, exclusionary norms and rituals, and psychologically unsafe workplaces. The white paper also presents 12 tangible and immediate steps that technology leaders can take to drive meaningful change in their workplaces and across the technology industry. Today, we are privileged to have 2 leaders join us to discuss the topic of psychological safety, Ella Wismer and Blair Hervey. Before we begin, let us have our guests tell us a bit more about themselves in their own words. Over to you, Ella.
Thanks, Ed. So my name is Ella Wismer. I am a 33-year-old transgender woman working as a software developer at a company based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, called Nexient. I got my start in developer work at AWS a few years ago. Before that, I spent nearly a decade as a Linux administrator. As part of my work at Nexient now, I've taken on the responsibilities of founding and leading our LGBT employee resource group. So in addition to my work duties, I'm growing that. And outside of that, I'm also pursuing some healthcare access related activism. So really happy to be able to be here and share some of my experiences.
Well, thank you, Ella. Thank you for that wonderful introduction of yourself. It's always so great to learn a little bit more about you as well as Ed, and thank you for having me. My name is Blair G. Hervey, also known as the Corporate Strategist. I help Black women navigate the complexities of corporate America, as well as focus on public speaking in regards to diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility. For my 9-to-5, I also work for Salesforce as a sales leader excellence coach, helping leaders become much more excellent at work, but also in the community and hopefully at home. And I'm happy to be here to talk about this amazing topic. I'll get back to you, Ed.
Thank you. So happy to have both of you over here. Now, psychological safety, as you well know, is probably the most personal topic for discussion, but is probably the most important topic when it comes to building truly equitable and inclusive workplaces. So I will urge you to feel as free as you'd like to share stories or insights. It's entirely up to you. This is more your platform to share your experiences so audience can learn from you. So we leave it up to you to share as much as you'd like about any of the topics. And I might chip in as well to share some insights I had from being a non-binary person of color in the technology industry, which is, from an intersectionality point of view, one of the smallest slices of that intersectional Venn diagram that we can have. So with that being said, before we begin delving into what we can do to address the challenges we face related to psychological safety, it'd be great if you could share your personal stories/experiences or experiences of other people that you may be aware of related to this topic, and what you have seen or observed over the years of working in the technology industry and growing to be a leader in the technology industry.
Sure. Larry, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to get us started. Psychological safety, it sounds like a great, smart term. And when I learned about it just recently, probably over the last couple of years, it was a great topic to introduce to folks who weren't familiar with the phrase itself. But the feeling, I think, is something that we can all relate to. Whether it's not feeling safe in a space or feeling excluded, not feeling like we belong for a plethora of different reasons. I didn't mention before, but I definitely identify as a mother. Can't take that away from me because I do have a 19-year-old son as proof. And I've always been the youngest mom with the oldest child. And so there have been so many different spaces where I didn't feel like I belonged, whether it was at a basketball game with the other moms and talking about certain topics. They were far into their career before I was, whether it was being in the tech space, as it is predominantly white male, and being a single mother, totally couldn't relate. And then of course, as also identifying as a Black woman and pansexual, like the spaces for me did not exist in the tech space. But what I've learned recently is that there are 4 stages of psychological safety, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But the very first one is inclusion. And being able to be welcomed into a space has always been very important to me. Having a seat at the table, having my nameplate there, and knowing that I am the person that can only fit in that seat has really been a critical part of my career and my advancement in different spaces. So there are lots of stories I can bring to the table, whether it's people talking about my hair or how I talk, because I love to say y'all, because I'm from the South, from Louisville, Kentucky and Texas. But I would really love for us to take some time, I'm sure we will, to focus on that feeling. And it's something that we can all relate to, whether or not we identify as quote unquote diverse talent or a minority. So I'll get us started, but Ella, what have been your experiences with psychological safety?
Sure. I think it's really great that you talked about not just the definition of psychological safety, but also that feeling, that sense of belonging. And I think inclusion was a great call out, because it really is about feeling like you belong in a space, like you are valuable in a space, and that you there really is just like a sense of danger in spaces that are literally psychologically unsafe. You don't know who you can talk to. You don't, even just for help about work, right? Even just unrelated to other people, you're asking for help on a project. Who can you actually ask for advice on this? It happens not just on projects, but also I think sort of systemically within the organization. Like I mentioned, sort of issues related to healthcare that I've been dealing with, and getting access to necessary healthcare, that singles me out as well, right? And so now I have to take on the risk of challenging our HR department, of challenging the people who purchase these policies, and somehow navigate that without bringing ill will on myself, or risking retaliation or retribution, which are of course illegal, but in an at-will employment state, anything can happen, right? So everything from, I had a coworker who, brilliant DevOps engineer, who left in part due to rampant misgendering for some reason in one of her departments or teams. I haven't been able to really find out who that was or where that was, because I'd like to address it. But she clearly felt so unsafe that it wasn't good for her to work here anymore. And I know that her decision to leave was preceded by a period of very low output, So I suppose it's getting into some of the effects that this stuff can have, but
Ella, if I may just ask you, since I'm somewhat aware of the challenges and that you've and the heroic stance you've taken on challenging some of the healthcare inequity where you live, what would you have liked as you went through your journey for an organization or individual leaders to provide you that you were not provided? So that may be. We are all at whatever point in time, both leaders and employees. So what could the government, the employer, the individual leaders have done that would have given you that sense of inclusion, dignity, and belonging?
I think the biggest thing I think there are two things. One is the fact that every step of the way, I have to re-educate a whole new set of bureaucrats on what it means to be transgender, why this care is medically necessary. I have to sort of help them break down their own cisnormative views, so that I can be well, it's exhausting. So just education about the things that I'm working with, but I understand too that, it's still new to the mainstream, but still I wish that I didn't have to do that. The other one is just education of the policies that people are enforcing. Everyone I talk to, from HR to our benefits consultants to the insurance company themselves, no one actually had a solid grasp on their policies. Like, I get different answers saying this is covered, this isn't covered. Turns out it's not covered. I'm going through this expecting this, but then something like this happens. So having people who are competent in that as well would have made my life a lot easier, to just get straight answers. Another is that it's really frustrating to me, the lack of oversight that governments have into how health insurance companies operate. For instance, my health insurance company, they have an appeals process for denials, but there isn't actually any way for me to prove medical necessity for the services that I was requesting. The policy simply states that they're cosmetic, never medically necessary, and the form that they send off to medical reviewers for these appeals states at the top in big bold letters, medical necessity does not override policy. So I have to ask myself, what's the point of this appeal process? It doesn't make sense. So even in the appeal to the regulatory department for the insurance company, I asked them flat out, can you affect a change in this policy? It's clearly illegal, discriminatory, it's not based in science, and they said, no, we can't. We have no power to do that. We can overturn individual appeals, that's it. So it's like, so who can make these insurance companies responsible, right? The review I had with the regulatory agency was sent out to an independent review organization. The doctor that reviewed it, based in Texas, invented requirements for me that were never in my insurance policy. Were nowhere along the process of requesting these services, and that opinion was used to deny this care for me, right? So I'm currently in the process of appealing that in the circuit court, but all these processes are so mechanical. I don't know what I want different about them exactly, but it feels like everyone I talked to was bound by some set of rules that they couldn't step out of, even if what they saw or what they felt was more correct than what was on the page. So having some agency or something that actually has power to regulate these industries, I think that's really what I would like to see. So.
And Ella, it's a shame that you had to go through that. And then one of the things that, this personal stories that I hear from you and others brings to mind is that companies always say that we want our employees to perform at their best. I think a lot of us, just imagine the amount of emotional energy and intellectual energy that's sucked out of each one of us to deal with issues such as this. So even if you're not moral, the pure profit motive should drive companies to create psychologically safe workplaces. I'm not saying don't be moral, but I'm saying even if you cannot bring yourself to be moral, your story and so many others that we hear is a clear case of incredible talent focusing on things to make themselves better, make themselves fit in better, as opposed to what companies would want. Blair, from your perspective, could you share some insights into this concept of, that an energy that gets taken away from psychologically unsafe workplaces, and what impact that has had on you or other people that you know, and put that in perspective on what companies should be doing differently?
For sure. It's interesting and sad and unfortunate, Ella, my heart goes out to you and, to all of us who are constantly re-traumatized by always explaining not necessarily this experience because this is for educational purposes, right? But always explaining what our experience has been, how that impacts us. And then on top of that, we have to share and educate with others who aren't familiar with our experience on how to advocate for us. That in itself is, it's incredibly, incredibly exhausting, and where I believe it definitely begins. I want to say it starts with cultural competency, is learning, taking the steps to do the education, because guess what? As a Black woman, I was about to say young, but I can't say that anymore. But as a Black woman coming into a space, a predominantly white space, I have to do my research. I have to do my research on the team, on my leader. I'm asking questions about how they operate. I'm asking questions about other people of color that are on their team, about their diversity initiatives, all of that. And so once I get into that space, I'm sure you both can relate, I'm having to navigate the space. Like, when do I speak up? When is it okay for me to say y'all? When can I relax, the code switching? I'm having to do all of that, but guess what? The other people around us, they don't have to do that. So it's always exhausting to go into that space. And to do the research, to think, the lack of cultural competency is alarming. And then from there, again, the re-traumatization is exhausting. And then from there, education on advocacy is sad. Because again, I'm having to tell you, okay, this is how to speak up for me. But going back to morality, to what both you, Ella and Ed said, just doing the right thing. Like, if you feel in your core, in your gut, like, ooh, this doesn't sound right, this doesn't seem right, I feel like I should be, even if I can't fight for this person, let me say something to make sure that this person feels good or feels welcome or feels warm, feels affirmed in this space. You don't have to say the right thing, but what do we always say? Silence is violence. And I love what you said, Ella, that word danger. There is an element of danger in not speaking up, advocating, and then learning about the experience of others when they come into your space. So for me personally, again, there are a plethora of different experiences that I could share, and those of my colleagues as well. But I would definitely say the common denominator would be those three things. Is me constantly having to explain, hey, in the tech space, this has been a predominantly white space that was built for men, that was built for white men to succeed. So when people of color or different people come into this space, yes, it is going to be a challenge for us. We have a lot of things that are held against us at this point. Explaining that over and over again is exhausting. And then from there, having to say, okay, when we're in a meeting, if you hear something that's uncomfortable, or if I give you a look, or if, y'all just speak up. I think that's where we have to just do the work and just speaking up. And then from there, we can get it right. But the right thing to do is speaking up first. That helps us all feel safe.
Do you mind if I respond? I think those are really great points. And to your point about having other people speak up, on one of the first teams I was on here, there was another woman on the team who would correct people in meetings for me when they misgendered me, and it helped produce this sense of belonging, and I was shocked that she thought to stand up in that way. Honestly, I was like, I did not expect that, so yeah, absolutely. And I also wanted to call out the having to research the teams that you would want to move to, right? The people that you want to work for, the companies. Like, I've had that thought in my head, I'm looking at various so here we have a bunch of projects, we're constantly moving around different contracts, and I'm thinking, okay, I kind of like to work on another project, but I also know that there are some out and out bigots at this company, like, I know that there are people who think all LGBTQ people are groomers, right? And how do I know I'm not going to end up having to work with one of these people? If that happens, whose side does HR take? It's a whole, just even having to deal with the possibility of that is exhausting. So yeah, I think that was a great call out. Yep.
And then Ella and Blair, just building on your comment about the one of the points you said about safety, the flip side of safety is danger. I don't know whether a lot of people realize that for some people, that danger can be physical and that danger can lead to death. A simple example that's in the white paper about social events that happen late at night. The three of us on this webinar are statistically at much higher rate of sexual violence, other violence, and death walking at night than people who may be setting up those events. And then that cuts across multiple identities and multiple intersectionalities, and people need to be aware that we do not live in an equal society where everything is the same for whoever's setting those rules. So I think that's an important thing for us to consider as well, that it is not just what we feel or what we go through. Sometimes it is a real physical danger as well. And psychologically unsafe places expose people to physical danger in addition to emotional harm.
100%. Yep.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. When I think about that too, it's just when we're talking about doing the research and going into these spaces, right? It's on the leaders as well. I definitely believe the entire organization, but the leaders of those teams to truly cultivate this environment of inclusivity, right? So it's not warning them, hey, you're gonna have a Black person on your team, or you're gonna have a transgender person or someone who identifies as non-binary, but it's to say, if they've never had those experiences before, you better figure out a way to start the topic, or to figure it out in a very smart and healthy way to cultivate the soil for sure.
Well, on that topic, we probably have another 10, 12 minutes left in the webinar. Let's go to the last topic of what can leaders, you're both leaders in your organizations. What are you as leaders doing to have this impact, or what would you suggest other leaders do so that people do not go through the kind of stories that you've shared, or the kind of experiences I've had, or the other kinds of evidence that we've identified in the white paper? So Ella, Blair, any one of you want to start with that? Please go ahead.
Yeah. If it's okay, I think what you said, Blair, about leaders preparing teams, I think that at this point, there are plenty of resources on the internet, right? I know for a fact there are tons of anti-racism teachers, for instance, who will have developed articles, slides, trainings for how do I introduce anti-racism onto my team to help make people of color and Black people safe, right? And not just Googling that, yeah. It just seems obvious once you think of it, but I feel like a lot of people just won't even think of it because of this defaultness that they get to exist in, right? Yeah, so I think for me, being a leader and a manager of a team, so making sure that I can cultivate spaces like that. Part of that is just being myself too, right? Being myself, being visible. And it can feel dangerous to do that, which is what we've been talking about, is that being out, being visible in these ways does not feel safe. But I think that it is also a very powerful tool that we can use when we have the capacity for it. Obviously our self-care and our health is the most important. But just knowing that if I did have another person under the trans umbrella, or someone on the LGBTQ spectrum coming onto my team, they would already know, hopefully, that they are represented here, and that I think going all the way back to the beginning, that inclusion is just there by default. So I think that's yeah.
Thank you. Well said. So two things come to mind when we're talking about leaders. So there's this quote out there that says that hiring diverse talent fixes the culture. So it's either a quote or some type of myth, that they throw out there. I usually include in my presentations. But the truth is, hiring diverse talent does not fix the culture, it breaks the people. And I think leaders should know that, and you're absolutely right, Ella, it does start with us. But I think that's also the problem with some leaders. They go into leadership and you're already broken in this area, thinking, well, I'll just hire some people that look different, and then now we're a diverse team. But they're not thinking about the impact of retainment. They're not thinking about the impact on readiness, which are business factors and business metrics they should care about because it will cost them money in the long run. But ultimately, they have to think about those impacts, recruiting, retainment, and readiness. And then the other things is, like you said, cultivating the soil, or how we have all said, cultivating that soil. And
I love that phrase, by the way, cultivating the soil. I think it's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. You know where I got that from? So I bought a house back in May, or the May before last. And I prayed for a garden. I remember I just wanted a small little garden. Mind you, I do not have a green thumb whatsoever. I just wanted to plant, some lettuce, maybe some tulips, something like that. I have 30 something species in my home of plants. And I have just let Portland do its thing. I live in Portland, Oregon, let the rain come down. And I'm like, why aren't the roses growing? Why is this overwatered? Why is this muddy? And what I've learned is you have to cultivate the soil. Some of those plants needed fresh soil. Some of them needed more water. Some of them needed plant food. And that's why I use that term. We're not taking the time to figure out what do these quote unquote plants, what do we need to grow? And that's where we go wrong. So that's one thing I think about. The other thing I think about is something a friend introduced to me. It's called the allyship continuum. And it's something anyone can Google, right? And it's just thinking about where do you exist so you can self-assess, how am I joining forces with minorities, oppressed folks, underrepresented groups? Am I starting at the beginning of this continuum and I am absent? I have no idea what's going on in the trans community, right? I have no idea what's going on in the LGBTQ+IA community, right? I have no idea. You could start there and then you move into being much more aware, and then you acknowledge, and then you start advocating, and then you become an ally. So we're always raising our, Ella, we're raising everyone's raising their hand. I'm an ally. What work?
Who told you that?
Who told you that? Who told you that? Then you become an ally, and then my favorite is an accomplice, right? You're willing to risk your privilege to ensure that an underrepresented community is lifted up. So I think Ed, to your question, there's a lot of things leaders can be doing, but I think those are some areas that we could definitely start.
And I especially like the last part about allyship means taking some risks, because people who are marginalized take risks every day. Whether it's driving a car or whether it's shopping in a grocery store. I can tell you that I have straight hair. I choose to keep it bald because I do not want the privilege that comes by being a dark-skinned person with straight hair. But when I have straight hair, I'm treated very differently in society than when I am like this, and I'm very aware of that. It's shocking that just little differences like that people notice. And then what would you recommend to people who are, either allies because they're fortunate enough not to be impacted by any of the intersectionalities or marginalization? There's a few people like that, but most of us are marginalized one way or the other. So what would be your recommendations to people who are, maybe leaders in organizations who are clearly unfamiliar with being Black or being transgender or being an immigrant or being of a different religion than the prevalent religion in our country? What would be your recommendation to say, these are the kinds of risks you should be taking, or the other way, these are the kind of risks you should expect as you start this journey, because this is not just risk-free involvement. So either one of you want to take that?
I'll go first if you're, Ella, just because I have a couple of examples.
No, absolutely.
Thank you. Have an immersive experience. So there are 3 examples I can think of very quickly. Back in 2020, my business partner and I, we created this series called 2020 Ain't Canceled. Yes, ain't, not is not, but ain't canceled, right? Because everybody was in this space where it's just like, oh, 2020 is over, we're in this pandemic, we're stuck at home. So it was a weekly series. We invited speakers and we had different topics. And what we started noticing were, although we were Black women creating spaces for other Black women, other white women were joining the calls. And they asked if it was okay. And sometimes they wanted to be a fly on the wall, which we never allowed them to be, because we want you to have an immersive and involved experience. But they learned so much about the challenges that we were experiencing. There was a Black woman that I most recently went to a Mexican restaurant with, and she was sitting there, she was like, I believe we're around criminals. I was like, girl, loosen up, right? Just and that's from her perspective, from where she lived in an inner city where there's lots of violence, and that was her experience. But then there was also an experience where I took someone to a people's market. I think that's what it's called here in Portland, a people's market, where it was hosted by BIPOC individuals, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And it was a white woman, and she looked around and she was like, Blair, I think I'm the only white woman here. I said, well, join the club, girl. Like, this happens to me all the time. And just in those 3 experiences, 3 moments where 3 different types of people were having an immersive experience, they learned about the culture. They had an opportunity to be uncomfortable, and so they could take something back as well from a lived experience in their own perspective. So I think that's really important for leaders. Have an immersive experience around groups of people that you're not familiar with. Ella, what are your thoughts? What do you think?
I think that is a key piece about willing to be uncomfortable, especially learning about biases you might hold. It's always uncomfortable, at best embarrassing, right? At worst, shame, self-hate, these things. And I think that can be difficult to engender in American corporate culture. So finding ways to be able to make that space for employees, for the leaders themselves. I think leaders absolutely should be the people leading the charge in this, saying, look, I'm willing to become uncomfortable to change my perspective because I noticed that we have absolutely no diversity here, and I think your point about not being able to just hire different people and having it fix itself is really, really poignant, because that's often a criticism that talking about topics like this brings, right? Is like, well, you can't just, hire all the gay people you want. What about all the other good candidates? And it's like, right, well, that's not really the point, Like, the point is, why aren't there any gay people working here? What makes it uncomfortable for them, And I think that means looking and finding spots where you would have to be uncomfortable, and then sharing that with your team, And I think also having to be ready to risk like team cohesion sometimes, right? If you have a team that is not diverse and you're trying to cultivate the soil, maybe you have some people who will reject this uncomfortableness entirely, right? They will not be open to it. I think you have to be prepared to potentially lose people like that, and recognize that they aren't people that you want to work with. They are not people that you want in your organization. They shouldn't be there regardless of their output. And I guess, since that does seem like a moral choice, even like you said, Ed, in the context of a pure profit motive, if you cultivate the soil, you'll grow vegetables, right? It'll come back. You'll find people, and chances are it'll be a stronger and healthier team, which generally means more output. So
thank you.
Yeah.
And on that note, thank you so much, Ella and Blair. This has been a very enlightening webinar, and thank you for sharing your deep personal experiences. We really appreciate that. I hope that the audience can learn from that, and we encourage the audience to go to www.techpact.org and sign up to take the TechPACT pledge, where they can all be part of this journey we're taking together to drive improved representativeness in our industry. On that note, thank you so much. People listening at home, look forward to the white paper that will be published on the TechPACT website as well as on other publications. And please do look for and buy the ebook. All proceeds from the ebook do go to TechPACT, and you can find the ebook on Amazon.com by just typing in "Impact Beyond the Diversity" headlines. It'll have this beautiful logo up there, so it will be impossible to miss. And thank you, Ella and Blair, for participating in the webinar. Thank you, everybody else, for listening. And please join us for the other webinars on this series. Thank you. Bye.